Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, we learned about my father, Wilbur, and heard a little about his marriage to Miss Anne. Episode 20, Stand By Your Man, 1977 style. The place is San Francisco. The time, late 1990. I continued therapy after Miss Anne died. During therapy, Mark came up as well. The first time we broached the topic was soon after I came back from Mom's funeral. I started the session by complaining that Mark hadn't seemed to register what I'd gone through. During our last phone call, he paused long enough for me to tell about the funeral, but then soldiered ahead with yet another stream of complaints about Victor. "What do you say to him when he does this?" Dennis asked. "Do you take care of yourself in this situation?" "Well, no, I usually try to suggest solutions to his problems, or ways he could either get out of the situation or get Victor to behave better. Or I'll say something like, 'Poor dear.'" Do these phone calls seem similar to other phone calls you told me about? That stopped me dead. Just then, it dawned on me, and I recognized a pattern, or more accurately, it was the first time I acknowledged the pattern, and finally admitted it to myself. Mark and Mom. Mom and Mark. They were confused in my mind because they both dealt with things the same way. They both liked being victims, and they liked complaining about things, not actually working to change them. And they both treated me the same way. So, I reacted to each in the same way, that same mixture of loyalty confused with affection and annoyance. Miss Anne used to do the same thing on the phone, as I remember, Dennis continued. And you always suggested ways to try to fix things. Then she'd play the yes, but game. You used to get really frustrated about it, I remember you telling me. That was so true. Looking back, I think Miss Anne suffered from a severe depression in the last years of her life. She would go to work, come home, change clothes, lock herself in, watch TV, take her bath, and be in bed by 10 p.m. She did this from the middle of my college years until she died, which was 12 years all told. She never went to the movies and only started going to church the year before she died. The rest of her time was spent reading People magazine, watching TV, and rattling around her big house. Mom had no friends. Friends proved disappointing because she chose unwisely and she had no boundaries. The only people she interacted with were the folks at the bank where she worked and us kids. She complained bitterly to me on the phone that she was lonely and didn't know what to do about it. I remember her saying repeatedly, "They don't tell you what to do once your kids are raised and educated." My response was usually along the lines of, "Why would you want them to tell you what to do anyway? Decide what you want to do and do it yourself." I'd make suggestions, like night school, church, hobbies, reading groups, and I'd hear the yes, but, and then I'd hear some sort of reason she couldn't do whatever I just suggested. I was doing the same thing with Mark. Somewhere in my mind, he had become Mom to me. There were certainly parallels, but I hadn't chosen to see them until Dennis suggested them. He floated the idea that Mark and Miss Anne were both depressed, because depression can immobilize people and narrow their worlds. This certainly made sense in Miss Anne's case, and I think Mark's as well. I would say that this depression of Mom's started about the beginning of my second year in college. It stemmed from a long chain of events that started when she changed jobs from the bank to working at the Chevrolet dealer. While I was finishing high school, Mom went to working from Garrity Bank and Trust to being a cashier at Boyd Chevrolet. Why the change, I don't know. Money perhaps, or not enough respect. She felt that she should have been the head teller, even though she hadn't been at the bank all that long. One day, soon after she started her new job, she came home from work all a-twitter. It seems there was a certain used car salesman who was paying her attention. His name was Gary Jones. He took her out to dinner about 2 months or so after she started working at the dealership, so we got to meet him when he came by the house to pick her up. Now, let me introduce you to Gary Jones. Gary was a good old boy from Clinton, Oklahoma, about my height, husky, with dark hair, obviously capped teeth, Western-style tan bulletproof polyester leisure suits with the brown top stitching on the yoke, and a belt buckle the size of a hubcap. Later outfits usually included tight Wrangler or Lee jeans, never Levi's, beige plaid Western shirts, and cowboy boots, which he called shit kickers. I also remember a cowboy hat on the shelf behind the back seat of his car, which was a teal blue metallic 1976 Chevy Monte Carlo loaner from the dealership with the CB radio. Remember those? This hat, of course, was visible through the rear window, sort of a primitive form of window display, I guess. Gary was a puzzlement to us kids. Mom had finally, fully, and thoroughly embraced her Kim Novak and Vertigo phase, which she kept until she died. So it was a curious mix, the used car salesman dating Kim Novak. And he took her to country and western bars, and she went willingly. This was just too ghastly. It only took a few months before Gary moved in. Now, I remember Miss Ann getting all righteous and sanctimonious about other acquaintances of hers who were shacking up. She ragged on and on about how low rent that was. Somehow, though, this wasn't the same thing. Or at least, she didn't regard it as shacking up. This was a far more noble relationship. We kids knew not to call it shacking up. We knew not to say anything at all. Besides, Mom was getting it regularly. Thankfully, we didn't hear any evidence of that. That would have been way too oogie for words. And she was in a regular good mood. Gary also took her out frequently, so she was either in a good mood or out of our hair on a regular basis. And for this, we were very thankful. All in all, though, this was an uncomfortable situation for us kids. Now remember, this was Bethany, Oklahoma, Nazarene country in the mid-1970s, and such things were still frowned upon. The neighbors always looked at us sideways. We should have been used to it from the Don White days, when the loud battles were a spectator sport for the neighbors, but it was still annoying. But having Gary living there gave us kids some relief from Mom's tantrums and torture. I was still in high school when it started, with the distractions of a job, school, persecution for being a fag, and homework to keep me busy. That's why to this day I'm a little fuzzy about dates, but I know I was a senior in high school. When Gary had been living with us for a few weeks, he started in on Miss Ann about an idea he had, a business proposal. It was, as I remember, a type of insurance for auto breakdowns, sort of like AAA, but not really. He began with the folksy, just a little idea I had approach. Over the next weeks, though, he stepped up the pressure, playing on Mom's dissatisfaction with her job, by selling this as a way for her to be her own boss. All she had to do was finance the operation, which had to be launched in, are you ready? Atlanta. Atlanta, I remember thinking. Atlanta? Why not here? I never really had a good grasp on geography. I still get it confused with geometry. But even I knew that Atlanta was not the financial center of the country. Why Atlanta? It didn't make sense. Of course, Gary would have to live in Atlanta to get things going, so he would need an apartment and a car to commute back and forth in. Since he wouldn't be working for Boyd Chevrolet anymore, he wouldn't have the demo car he got to drive. This is when Miss Ann leased the 76 Coupe de Ville. Also, he would need some sort of income while he was setting things in motion. Of course. Papers were drawn up, or more to the point, Gary drew the papers up. Mom sent me, with the papers in hand, to see Harry one Friday afternoon to have him look them over before she signed them. As he was reading, I watched the color drain from his face, then come back a brilliant red. Oh man, I thought, this doesn't look good. Harry leaned over his desk, took off his glasses, fixed me with his most serious look, and shouted, "Tell her not to sign anything until she talks to me." "That bad, huh?" I said. "I will repeat for emphasis. Do not sign anything until she talks to me. Got it?" "Yes, sir." "Okay, now get home as fast as you can. That jackass might beat you there and talk her into this damn thing." So I got home as fast as I could. When I came in, Miss Ann asked, "Well, what did Harry say?" "He said, do not sign anything until she talks to me." I repeated it for emphasis. "Oh, I thought he would say that. He just doesn't want me to be happy," she whined. Quite the response I expected. The weekend came and went as usual. Mom and Gary went out for the afternoon, came home, changed for dinner, went out again, and stayed out quite late both days. Monday came, and he had her signature on those papers. I found out later that he had used the "if you really loved me, you would sign these" gambit. When Harry found out, he hit the ceiling. I hope he sent her a whopping bill for that consultation. There was much excitement as Gary and Miss Ann both went to Atlanta to find a place to live in an office. The place and the office had to be nice so potential customers would think he was legit. They had leased the Cadillac before they left, but it was tagged in Georgia, so he wouldn't look so transient. There were trips back and forth for both of them, and Mom was really excited about the future of not working, as she was sure her investment would pay off handsomely. Gary promised it would. She was actually bearable to live with during this time. As the months wore on, however, and the money kept going out and none coming in, Mom became increasingly nervous. Gary knew how to dodge and get her to stop nagging, but it was becoming apparent to all of us, except Miss Ann, that the man was having a really good time in Atlanta on her dime. In the meantime, Lori and Kathy both talked to me about how Gary had tried to get into their pants. This was most perplexing. He was very vocal about how much he loved Mom, but was hitting on both my sisters. This was way too oogie for words, way too close to incest for me. They certainly couldn't go to Mom about it. She would just blame them for somehow enticing him. I wanted not to believe any of this, but one day, denial was not enough. I was sitting in the family room watching TV after school. Gary was back from Atlanta for a short visit. Mom was still at work, and it was just the two of us in the house. He came over, sat down on the sofa, and started rubbing my back. Then he started rubbing my back under my shirt. Then he stood up and undid his fly. As an aside, years later, when trying to ascertain just why Mark stayed so long with Victor, I asked him, since he wasn't good looking, was he at least good in bed? Or did he have a big dick? You can forgive 2 out of 3. That particular day, I found out which 2 Mom forgave. There was some cliche porno dialogue like, "You want this, don't you?" or words to that effect, but I was totally grossed out. It was big, no doubt about it. Uncut, uncircumcised for you straight folks. And it was the ugliest penis I have ever laid eyes on, even to this day, and I've done lots of field research. I ran to my room, slammed the door, and put a chair under the doorknob and didn't come out of there until he was gone the next morning. As the situation unraveled, Miss Ann's mood swings kicked in with a vengeance. This was when the tranquilizers first appeared. It was becoming obvious, depending on the point of view, that, to her, the money would run out before the business got going, or that, to us kids and Harry, that Gary was pissing the money away without even trying to get anything started. As it was, checks for back payment of alimony to a heretofore unknown ex-wife, surprise, cleared the bank, plus other disbursements for obviously non-business expenditures. Even in the face of all this, Mom doggedly refused to face facts. Gary was still the hard worker who would make this business go and get her out of working for other people. After all, he promised, and he loved her. There's one incident that happened during this time that takes the Stand By Your Man Award for 1977. As you may remember, Miss Ann had this thing about her hair. She had a standing appointment with her hairdresser that would not be denied nor missed for any reason. We kids had strict instructions not to disturb her there, even if a nuclear warhead fell on the house. As a result, I never saw her during a comb out into the French twist. I always timed it so that if I had to go there, I arrived just as the final coat of lacquer was being applied. Now, you'll probably wonder how I know all the details of the following altercation, since I wasn't allowed to go into the salon while Mom was there. I heard about everything later at work. I worked at the ice cream place down the street from the salon, and two of the ladies who witnessed this particular spectacle were talking about it as I was cleaning tables. Hearing Mom's name got my attention real fast, and I made sure their table and the surrounding area were sparkling clean. These women had never seen me, so they spoke freely. This is as I heard it. Saturday morning, Oklahoma City, the beauty shop full with the usual burble of activity of women getting styled up for Saturday night out. Miss Ann was there, her shampoo done, her curlies out, the hair ratted up, and she was ready for the comb out. Now think Bride of Frankenstein on a bad hair day. And then suddenly, the shop door flew open, hitting the wall with enough force to leave a dent in the fake wood grain paneling before bouncing back. Standing there was a wild-eyed woman looking very much like High Noon on the OK Corral meets Joan Crawford with the coat hanger. "Which one of you bitches is Ann King?" she demanded, veins popping in her neck. Well, everyone turned, looked at Mom, pointed to her, and said, "There she is!" The interloper stomped over to her, stuck a finger under her nose, and screamed, "You're screwing around with my man!" At which point a very sordid story tumbled out for all the salon to hear. As an aside, I'm sure these ladies dined out on this story for years. The woman's name was Priscilla. I don't know why I remember that. And she was dating Gary the entire time he was dating Miss Ann, actually before he met Miss Ann. Even while he was living at our house, he was seeing this woman. And the kicker? They had a child to prove it. A 3-year-old named Kara. Again, why do I remember this? Priscilla even brought a photo of this child to Mom and threw it in her lap. After dropping this bomb, Priscilla parted with, "You stay away from my man, bitch!" And with another slam of the door, she was gone. Oh my God. When Mom got home, goddamn, she was mad. I don't know what irked her more. The fact that Gary was two-timing with this slattern, or that she had to endure this confrontation in front of an audience when her hair was not done. Ladies, I'm sure you understand, this would indeed be a conundrum. Either way, Miss Ann raged on for a few days about how dare that slut come into her beauty shop and accuse Gary of two-timing. And that photo, which she showed us while raging about that woman later, what did it prove anyway? The child didn't look anything like him. I would just hand her glasses. This was a clear case of the apple not falling far from the tree. But you know what? He, of course, denied it, talked her down, and she believed him and stayed with him even after being humiliated in the beauty shop like that.
Stand by it, man, and show the world you love him. Keep giving all the love you can.
It was only a matter of time before the Atlanta deal crashed. In 4 months, Gary Jones burned through $28,000 in 1977 money. He came back, and since he didn't have a job, he conned Miss Ann into buying him a used car lot to run. After all, he did quit his job for her to start this business and now needed an income. Now, it wasn't a posh lot, just one of those rinky-dink bare light bulb and tattered pennant 10-car operations at 10th and May, but really, hadn't he gotten enough? After a month or so of Gary running the lot, it was decided that it was time for him to move out. So he did. Then one day, while I was ironing a shirt for work, there came a call from his bank. "I'm just calling to confirm an address on an order for checks for a new account for Gary Jones," the woman's voice on the other end said. "We'd like to confirm this before we send the new checks out." "What's the address?" I asked. So she recited our address. "Hold it right there," I said. "He doesn't live here. This is not his address, nor is it his phone number. Take that information off his account and don't call back here again." "I see," she said, and hung up. The phone rang as I was walking out the door to work. It was Ruby from Harry's office, and she said in her beige tweed voice, which I adored, "It's your mother. She's here, and she needs for you to pick her up." "What's wrong?" I asked. "I can't go into it now, but could you please come? Right away." I loved the way she said, "right away," full stop, without the exclamation point, in that beige tweed voice of hers. I can still hear it in my head to this day. When I got to Harry's office, Miss Ann looked to have been crying. Harry was standing over her in the reception area with a mixture of concern and annoyance on his face. "What happened?" I asked. "Come into my office. We need to talk," Harry said. "Ruby, you take care of Annie." It seems that after I spoke to the woman from the bank, she called Gary at the rinky-dink car lot and told him what I had said. Mom had the bad timing to be sitting in his office when he took the call. Gary told the banker that of course he lived there, etc., and I was just causing trouble. The woman told him that until he could get his affairs straight, they would hold the checks. From what I remember Harry telling me, this caused a kiting operation to collapse. Kiting, as best Harry could explain, was some sort of bank fraud. Since I could never figure out to balance my checkbook, he didn't go into much detail. Gary got mad as hell and started slapping Mom around the office. She escaped and headed to Harry's office because it was close by. "Son, lonely people do very foolish things," Harry said. "Your mother is a very lonely woman. I try to watch out for her, but she is a grown woman, even though she makes these foolish choices." We had another of our conversations, this one centering on Harry's concern about how Mom's stupid decisions impacted on us 3 kids. In bits and pieces, Harry let escape that one of his concerns had been a contract with the hillbilly mafia that her second husband, Don White, had out on us. Yes, there was a hillbilly mafia in Oklahoma City during that time. We had gotten a visit from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation right after the divorce, telling us of just that contract. Yes, contract. Hillbilly mafia. It does exist, or at least it did then. From what I was able to stitch together, as Harry never came out and said anything specific because he was a lawyer, you remember, it was Harry who engineered the solution. You have a hitman, she has a hitman. If anything happens to her, they'll find your ass in a ditch in western Oklahoma with your throat cut. That is a direct quote. And that's how things were still handled in Oklahoma in the late 70s. From what Harry said, I don't even think Mom knew. He just took it upon himself to take care of the problem. "You know," Harry said, "this means you'll have to pay for your own college. This won't ruin your mother, but the money your dad worked hard and paid premiums for to make sure you all got your education, it's all gone." Later that evening, I went to visit my friend Steve and his brother Tony. Tony was a gentleman redneck. He had a neck that was good and red and short and thick for that matter and very muscular, but believed that any man who would hit a woman was lower than pond scum. I told him what happened and how terrible I thought it was. "And cops probably won't do nothing," he said. Well, especially when she doesn't want to file charges. There's nothing to be done, is there? I replied, sighing, making myself look every small, tiny, helpless inch of 5'5" and 125 pounds. Well, Ken, there might be if there was a case of beer involved. It was the first case of beer I ever bought. Being only 18, it was a bit of a trick, and it cost a lot more than if I were of age, but I managed. I don't know exactly what happened after that, but knowing Tony and his friends, most of whom could lift an engine right out of a car with their bare hands because winches were for sissies, well. In the meantime, I had a powwow with Lori and Kathy. Since Lori worked in the emergency room of the hospital in Del City, she knew a lot of police officers. Now, I use the word knew in its most biblical sense as well, because it was a safe bet to assume that she had known most, if not all, of the officers she ever met. Lori conferred with them as to what to do and gave them Gary's license plate number and the description of the car. Mom started proceedings against Gary, suing for monetary damages as well as punitive damages. Harry filed the lawsuit, and the case hit the newspapers. It was a slow news day, and this was really embarrassing. I was thankful that I was known on a first-name basis in college because I did hear some of the other students talking about the case in the student union and just how stupid Mom was. As I sat there at the table that morning, one guy shouted, "Jesus, what an idiot! She gave him all that money. What was she thinking?" As I said, I was glad he didn't know my last name. He didn't know the half of it, I thought. He had no idea that the guy was also hitting on her daughters and her son. And what of her second husband and all the drama there? He didn't know the half of it. He had no clue. Gary lit out for Europe, or so we heard. It seems he had accumulated some black eyes and broken ribs, his sister said. I wonder what happened. I was secretly relieved that he was out of the country. The appointed day in court arrived, and Gary didn't show. The judge issued a summary judgment, and I didn't have to testify. Naive as I was terrified that if this went to trial, Gary's hitting on all of us would come out, and it would somehow shatter and devastate Mom and, by extension, our whole family. Even though it was Gary who was doing all the misbehaving, Miss Ann would have never forgiven us kids. She would have blamed us for destroying her happiness and her fortune. In her eyes, we, not Gary or her foolishness, would have been the reason for this whole thing failing, both the business and the relationship. She went to her death not knowing. Later, the judgment ran out, and instead of renewing it, she let it lapse. In therapy, I remembered one evening during this crazy time, the evening when I got it cemented in my head that one of my functions was to take care of and to fix people. Miss Ann was really upset that Gary had left and taken her for a lot of money. Here she was, alone, with a whopping legal debt, inheritance mostly gone, no man, and egg on her face. It was just past sunset when the air is this dark blue. There were no lights on in the house yet, just the fading blue light from outside. Miss Ann had recently started taking the tranquilizers frequently. That night, she also had a cocktail or two, which she usually didn't do. We were at the kitchen counter, me on one side, Mom sitting on one of the bar stools opposite. We were talking about all of this business with Gary. Suddenly, she began to melt down and lose control, crying uncontrollably and collapsing onto the counter. "Help me, help me! I can't take it anymore!" she shrieked. I was panicked by this. Here she was, the adult, sort of, in this situation, and she wanted me to help her. And I didn't know what to do. This was one of those, oh, fuck moments. What did I know? I was just a teenager, one who'd been through some things to be sure, but I was still just a teenager. I just remember that feeling of panic and how helpless I felt in the face of it. Oh, fuck. Right then, I resolved that I'd make sure I knew what to do to fix any situation. I'd never be in a situation like that again. So Dennis really called it right when he drew the connection between my behavior with Miss Ann and the similarity to my behavior with Mark on the phone. If I could fix them, then I wouldn't feel helpless, something I had resolved never to feel again. Dennis said, somewhere in your mind, Mark and your mother are the same person. Both seem helpless, and your instinct is to fix the situation which you learned as a teenager. But both are adults who have chosen to be in a certain situation. But understand, Mark isn't your mother. It's not your job to fix him. And you can't fix him. It's in his power to do that. It's not in your power. It's his choice, his job. I realized I'd have to learn how to live with the helpless feelings while allowing Mark to fix his own situation or not. It was easier said than done. In the next episode, we start the divorce of the decade. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.